6 p.m. on July 31st, 2025, Edward Zakrzewski was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. But how did a man, once an Air Force sergeant, end up on death row, facing his final moments in Florida? His crime, a brutal family massacre, shocked the state and left a legacy of pain. In these last 24 hours, what was going through his mind? Let's uncover the chilling final moments of Edward Zakrzewski's life. On June 9, 1994, the small town of Mary Esther, Florida, became the scene of a brutal crime that would leave the community in shock. Inside a quiet home, a family of four was about to be torn apart by violence. Sylvia Zakrzewski, 34, a mother of two, had made a decision that would change everything. After years of a strained marriage, she had planned to divorce her husband, Edward Zakrzewski, and take their children, Edward III and Anna, back to South Korea. It was a decision that shattered Edward. The tension had been building for months. Marital problems, accusations of infidelity, and racial tensions with Sylvia's family. But nothing could have prepared anyone for what would happen next. Edward, consumed by anger and fear of losing his children, was about to take a dark turn. That afternoon, Sylvia's son, Edward III, called his father at work. "Mom's filing for divorce today," he told him. "She's taking us to Korea." Those words hit Edward like a gut punch. Anger surged through him, drowning out everything else. By 3 p.m., Edward had left his job and purchased a machete, a crowbar, and rope, a disturbing indication of what was to come. He went home and hid the weapons in the bathroom, out of sight but within reach. When Sylvia and the children arrived home later that evening, Edward was already waiting, his emotions swirling into a storm. The house was eerily quiet, and the tension between the couple was palpable. Sylvia, unaware of the storm brewing, tried to have a normal evening, but Edward's silence spoke volumes. The moment she walked through the door, Edward didn't greet her. And then, his voice, cold and venomous, broke the silence. "You thought wrong," he told her, as she turned to face him. What followed was a conversation that would end in unimaginable violence. Sylvia tried to back away, but Edward's fury exploded. First, he struck her in the head with the crowbar, the impact a sickening crack. He then grabbed the rope and strangled her, ensuring she would never walk away from him. As her life slipped away, Edward dragged her body into the bathroom, where his children, unaware of the horror, would soon join their mother in death. With his wife dead, Edward calmly called his children to the bathroom one by one, pretending nothing was amiss. Edward III came first. He had no idea what awaited him. His father, machete in hand, attacked. The child struggled, trying to defend himself, but it was no use. The machete swung again and again, leaving Edward III lifeless on the bathroom floor. Anna, only 5 years old, was next. She came into the bathroom, innocent and unaware of the horror unfolding. Edward, with a coldness that could only be born of a twisted mind, ordered her to brush her teeth. As she saw the blood in her brother's body, fear gripped her, but it was too late. Edward raised the machete one final time and struck. 3 lives were stolen that night, and the brutality left the small town in a state of disbelief. No one could fathom the depths of Edward's rage. No one could explain why a father, a man who had sworn an oath to protect, could carry out such a monstrous act. The crime was calculated, deliberate, and cold. But the real question remained. Why? What pushed Edward Zakrzewski to kill the people he once loved? The investigation into the Zakrzewski family murders began the moment law enforcement arrived at the scene. The house was eerily still, the air thick with the scent of blood. When police entered, they were confronted with a gruesome sight. Sylvia and her 2 children, Edward III and Anna, all brutally murdered in the bathroom. No signs of forced entry, no robbery, just an unimaginable act of violence within the family home. With no immediate leads, the investigators focused on the one person who had disappeared, Edward Zakrzewski. His absence from work and his family's brutal deaths immediately raised red flags. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the motive behind the killings was personal, but the full extent of his rage was still a mystery. Neighbors couldn't recall hearing anything unusual, no sounds of struggle or screams, adding to the haunting nature of the crime. But the police dug deeper into Zakrzewski's background, uncovering strained relationships, a troubled marriage, and his ongoing resentment towards Sylvia's family, who had disapproved of him and his children due to their mixed race. As the search for Zakrzewski intensified, the case gained national attention. The turning point came when the show Unsolved Mysteries aired an episode detailing the brutal murders. A few days later, a local minister living in Hawaii watched the broadcast and recognized Zakrzewski, now living under the alias Michael Green. The minister, having realized who his new acquaintance truly was, confronted Zakrzewski. The following day, on October 15, 1994, Zakrzewski, realizing his time on the run had come to an end, surrendered himself to the police. Zakrzewski was extradited back to Florida, where he faced charges for the murders of his wife and children. The case seemed clear. He was the killer. But the true depth of his psychological state would soon be put to the test in court. The trial of Edward Zakrzewski began in March 1996, and the courtroom was charged with tension. Sylvia and her children's tragic deaths were dissected in grueling detail, each piece of evidence a brutal reminder of the violence that had shattered a family. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out the facts. The victims' bodies told a story of unspeakable brutality. The defense, led by attorney Elton Killam, argued that Zakrzewski was a man broken by years of emotional distress and mental strain. They painted him as a man overwhelmed by the pressures of his marriage, the racist comments from Sylvia's family, and his perceived failure as a husband and father. Killam suggested Zakrzewski believed he was sparing his children from a life of suffering, particularly from racial prejudice, in South Korea. But the jury wasn't convinced. The emotional testimony from a neighbor painted a different picture, one of a man who committed murder in a fit of rage, fueled by control and obsession. Also, the emotional toll of Anna's death, particularly the thought that she may have witnessed the brutal murder of her brother before being killed herself, weighed heavily on the jury's decision. On March 31st, 1996, after deliberating for hours, the jury recommended the death penalty for Zakrzewski's role in the murders of Sylvia and Edward III, but they were divided on Anna's death. A 6-6 split led to an automatic recommendation for life imprisonment for her murder. In a stunning move, Judge G. Robert Barron overruled the jury's recommendation and sentenced Zakrzewski to death for all three murders. In his final remarks, Judge Barron described Anna's final moments as unimaginably cruel, emphasizing the horror she must have felt, knowing her father was about to kill her after already murdering her brother. Zakrzewski's defense team argued that the death penalty was too harsh, citing his remorse in the traumatic circumstances leading to the murders. But the judge saw it differently. "This court cannot imagine a more heinous or atrocious way of dying," Barron said, affirming that Zakrzewski's crimes warranted the ultimate punishment. Zakrzewski was formally sentenced to death, but his case was far from over. The appeals would follow, each one a step toward the inevitable moment when justice would be delivered. In the final hours before his execution, Zakrzewski sat in his cell, reflecting on the life that led him to this moment. The weight of his impending fate was unmistakable, though he remained unsettlingly composed. As the clock ticked closer to 8 o'clock, his mind wandered through memories, both grim and ordinary, in a surreal mix of resignation and finality. His last meal, chosen with deliberate care, was a comforting reflection of the life he was leaving behind. Fried pork chops, potatoes, bacon, fried onions, toast, root beer, a slice of pie, a scoop of ice cream, and a cup of coffee. It was an indulgence of taste. As the final moments approached, Zakrzewski stood with an unsettling calm, his last words delivered with a strange calm of resolve, cut through the silence of the chamber. I want to thank the good people of the Sunshine State for killing me in the most cold and calculated, clean, humane, and efficient way possible. I have no complaints whatsoever. His tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of regret or fear, as though he had fully accepted his fate, even embracing it with a chilling sense of finality. The room was heavy with the weight of those words, a mix of cold detachment and resignation. On one side, those witnessing the execution may have felt a sense of justice fulfilled, their emotions tied to the belief that Zakrzewski's death was deserved. On the other, the gravity of his nonchalant expression of gratitude, a twisted acknowledgement of the system that was ending his life, left a haunting impression. Then, in a moment of unexpected vulnerability, Zakrzewski recited part of Robert Frost's "Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening," the words lingering in the air. "Whose woods these are, I think I know." His voice trailed off, halting abruptly in the middle of the verse. The silence that followed was deafening, his unfinished words hanging in the balance. A final reflection of the life he had lived, the choices he had made, and the untold depths of his final thoughts. At 6:04 p.m., the drugs began to flow, starting the irreversible process. Edward gasped a few times, his chest rising and falling in sharp jolts. But soon his breath slowed, his body growing still. By 6:12 p.m., he lay motionless, and just 1 minute later, at 6:13 p.m., officials pronounced him dead. The long finality of his last words and the life they represented was now concluded. The impact of Zakrzewski's crime rippled far beyond his execution. For the victims' families, the pain of loss never fully healed. Their lives were forever altered by the senseless violence, leaving a void that no justice could completely fill. The community, too, felt the weight of the tragedy, grappling with the emotional scars left behind. What do you think? Was justice truly served, or does the finality of his execution leave us with more questions than answers? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking stories like this. Now that you've heard Zakrzewski's story, it's time to hear from you. Do you believe the death penalty is an effective form of justice, or is there a better way to address crimes like this? Yes, no, or undecided? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's have an open discussion. If you want to explore more real-life stories and delve deeper into the complexities of crime, punishment, and justice, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your voice matters. Let's keep the conversation going.